Hello and welcome to the cesspool, and welcome back to the 25 Days of Christmas. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and Happy Holidays, whatever you celebrate. I hope it's a good one. And we're doing something a little bit different. I'm not just taking a look at one game. I'm taking a look at, like, a lot of games. I'm going through my collection, and I'm thinking, well, I've opened a lot of boxes, and you know, a lot of the content is about what's inside the box, and I thought, well, let's take a look at the box itself, and really, this is an appreciation of the different generations of video game artwork. This is not really a comparison. I mean, it is a comparison, but it's not to make one art style look worse than another. It's to show the evolution, not only in the artwork, but also, in the marketing of the industry, because let's be honest, that's what the artwork is all about. And barring the first generation, your Magnavox Odyssey, really, where did it all start? Well, right here. Right here with the Atari 2600. Same ass combat game that I showed off already. And I spent a lot of time already talking about the artwork of Atari games. So I'm not going to really go into it super deep, but essentially Atari's thing, and this was the case for Intellivision, ColecoVision, and any of the other odd console manufacturers that existed during this time. It was, let's make our game look amazing on the shelf. And that got a lot of people to buy your game. Again, this artwork, as I said in my video regarding this, it's beautiful artwork. And, it looks appealing. This looks like it would be a blast to play. But the thing is, this is not what you're going to be playing. And whether the kids who played the game really believed it, probably not after the first or second, go around of this. They see this on the shelf, they're like, oh, this looks like fun. Then they see what the game actually is, and then, it's not so fun. Or not even that it's not fun, but like, this is not what it looks like. It's a representation, a really rough representation of what you're supposed to think that it looks like. But obviously it's not going to look like that. And after a couple of attempts, probably, of buying different games, you find, they all kind of look the same. They're really, really low, either really low pixels, or they're vector graphics, or whatever it is. All the box is doing is basically telling you what you're supposed to be imagining the game looks like. And, whether that works or not is obviously up for debate. But I think really where this shined was not only, for the kids for the first time, but really the parents. Your dad goes to, Kmart in the 1980s, or the very early 1980s, or the late 70s. They see this on the shelf. They're like, oh, my son, he's a big fan of military warplanes. I think you'd really like this game. Look at that plane on the front. That looks like a good one. Yep. Oh, let me take a look. Oh, and there's tank. Oh, he likes tank. Yeah, there's yeah. It's gonna look just like that. They plug it into their freaking Toshiba CRT, and they get a 4-pixel little thing that maybe could be a tank. Dad doesn't pay attention because Dad doesn't care. But so he'll keep buying stuff that he thinks looks appealing on the shelf, because let's be honest, as a kid, who's buying most of your games? Your parents. So that worked. And obviously the fonts and everything are outdated. They're not stylized for the games, but that was the MO. And it was one of the reasons we got so much low quality programs that had appealing artwork in the early 80s, that it was a big reason that the video game economy crashed in 1983. There are other factors, of course, but this was a major thing. The misleading games, the low quality games, the lack of quality control that Atari and other manufacturers at the time had on their their not their products, but what was licensed for their consoles. And that's kind of how we got stuff like this. Again, this is an early example of it. This is tame compared to some of the stuff that came out later. I don't have examples of them, but that's basically the Atari era philosophy. So after the Atari era, philosophy shifted, and one particular company, along with Sega, but one particular company really figured out the strategy. Let's not make our game look on the outside anything better than what's on the inside. And that is the concept of Nintendo's black box games, the launch titles for the NES back in 1985. In Japan, with the Famicom, the video game crash was not really a thing. So they were able to make as beautiful and crazy artwork as they wanted. I suppose there was more expectation. There was also more quality control. I guess you could say that. I'm not an expert on Japanese video game economics. But in North America, they recognized why Atari failed. And it was that they focused too much on what you should be imagining is happening and not on what is happening. And obviously the NES had much stronger hardware than the 2600, but they didn't want to take a chance. And with marketing, they essentially said, okay, let's show a exciting representation of what's on the box, or what's inside the box. And I don't have a boxed up black box game, but this is a good example. I have Excitebike here, and this right here is basically what the box art would have been. There'd be obviously a little bit more going on here, but for the most part, you would have the pixelated artwork. This is, a representation of the sprite. Is it a little bit nicer looking? Yeah, but this is generally what you'd be seeing when you're playing Excitebike. It would, simply say Nintendo Entertainment System. Seal of quality, obviously, this became a big thing, the seal of quality, simply because, as I said, with Atari, there was a lot of, mixed quality of what was being put out on their console. And the Nintendo seal of quality, well, it doesn't mean too much today. At the time, it was a assurance to consumers that what was being put on Nintendo's console was essentially a quality program. What you were paying for was, debatably worth the money that you were paying. They were, essentially, let's throw any marketing schemes out the window and show people exactly what they're getting. Give them exactly what they want, which is honesty. And obviously this, didn't stay around for the entire NES lifespan, but in the beginning, to get people hooked, to get the market moving again on home video games, that is what they recognized they had to do. And Sega did this as well. They didn't go as far most of the time as like pixelated artwork, but they kept things simple, maybe a little too simple with the Master System, but they kept things simple and it worked. Not so much for Sega in North America, but the concept worked. It stuck. And with that, once, the traction, kept things moving, that's when we were able to move into more, realistic, not even realistic, but just more elaborate box art. So we started with stuff like this. And then later in the console's life, we moved on to stuff like this. We're still cartoonish. And now it's less of a representation of what the game is supposed to be, and more just an artistic reimagining of what could be. Obviously this is not Dr. Mario as in the puzzle game. It's sort of the story of Dr. Mario. Let's get a nice, drawing of Mario. And a drawing of the enemies, the viruses, and then let's kind of have a representation of the pills and the actual puzzle gameplay. And this is also when they started to throw taglines, which again, whatever. And these are first-party Nintendo games. Obviously, Nintendo knew what to do, and when they licensed stuff out and they let other manufacturers put stuff on their consoles, yeah, things varied, of course. And to an extent, after Nintendo gained the dominance that they wanted in the North American video game market, they, loosened up again, and they loosened things up, and they again started to allow stuff like this to happen, where we get this extremely detailed box art, and the game is going to look absolutely nothing like this. At least this, the sprites and everything, this is kind of what it looks like on screen, and this is not. But at this point, Nintendo's already the juggernaut, and what they're putting out alone kept the NES afloat. Put together the normally very, very high quality third-party games from third-party developers, we got some of the greatest games of all time, of course. But yes, that this is kind of the evolution of NES games. We kind of went from the simple to the less simple, but still the artwork is simple enough to where what you're seeing on screen it's a decent representation of that. And then at some point, we also went off the deep end. Not with Nintendo themselves, but, with the third-party developers. They allowed them to go a little bit off the rails, back towards, Atari levels of detail. And again, this artwork is beautiful. Do not get me wrong. This, these drawings are absolutely fantastic. That's why I own this game. I saw the artwork, and the game was not very expensive, and I had never heard of it. I thought, wow, this is beautiful artwork. Let me take a look. It's worth what I paid. I'll pop it in. And the game is not great. Game is not great. There's a reason it was cheap. But, the artwork paid for itself. This is a beautiful box. And in a way, the original developer and the artist, they got me to buy the game because of the artwork, which is what they probably wanted. It's just an ironic turn of events that now people are buying games for artwork and not really what's inside. And I'm guilty of it too, and this is an example of that. With the fourth generation of consoles now, with better technology, 16-bit graphics specifically with the Super Nintendo and the Genesis, box art truly could flourish. The artists could create the beautiful artwork that we saw during the Atari era, but now it would really be represented properly in gaming. So, when something like Street Fighter II came out, what we're seeing on the box was really a proper representation of what we were seeing on screen. These characters, while pixelated, would be represented. The action on the box would be at least properly represented on screen. You wouldn't feel cheated out of what you're getting, the content, compared to what was being advertised on the shelf. And in Nintendo's corner, obviously we got some of the most beautiful box art, of all time. But, in Sega's corner, we also got some absolutely fantastic art. And yeah, a lot of it was, this cartoonish style, but the third-party stuff on Sega a lot of times was more hardcore, and we would get this kind of, gorgeous artwork on Genesis just as much. And just like Nintendo, Sega put out stuff like, of course, Sonic, all of its spin-offs, everything, that would, continue that stylistic, cartoonish, but, truly detailed and properly executed box art that has absolutely stood the test of time. These representations of these characters are now completely iconic. And this era was truly a renaissance of box art, specifically for the reason that it could now, artists were set free. They were able to make what they wanted, and they knew that, it would be at least fairly properly represented on screen, and that completely changed the game. As the fourth generation turned into the fifth generation, however, the beauty of that, Renaissance box art, some of the most iconic, beautiful box art in the history of video games seemed to be lost. With the advent of 3D gaming, artists thought, and marketing people thought that, well, let's scrap the idea of, having a representation of what's on screen on the box. Let's show exactly what's in the game, let's show it on the box. And that resulted in, again, this mostly being an issue with N64, but the other consoles as well. Box art that looked like this. Again, I don't have a great example, like with the black box games, I don't have a great example available, so I'm going to use just the cartridge artwork to represent what I'm trying to say. With a game like Banjo-Kazooie and countless other games from the N64, PlayStation, Sega Saturn era, we got box art that looked like this. It's just, at this point, dated renders of these characters, dated rendered text, with a dated rendered background. And at the time, this was crazy. I mean, we're looking at 3D computer-generated graphics, and I get this. This is the mid-90s. This is a big deal. But in the long run, it is not as, it doesn't stand the test of time nearly as well. And sometimes it was done well. Again, I've shown examples of it. Stuff like, the Mario Party artwork in Japan, or even the Mario Party artwork in North America. This holds up pretty well. Super Smash Brothers for N64, again, holds up really well. But a lot of times, we're getting this. We're getting these low quality, poly models, slapped on a box, and they call it a day. And it feels like they didn't put as much effort in as they did back in the Super Nintendo era. There were, exceptions to this, obviously. Something like Zelda Ocarina of Time, or Majora's Mask. Beautiful artwork. There was beautiful artwork in the N64 era. It just was... it was rare to come by, and sometimes we found it on non-Nintendo platforms, or which at the time, leading into that generation, you're thinking, oh well, Nintendo's going to have the best artwork. They have the past two generations. Sometimes PlayStation, having the lower quality console, not the lower quality console, but the lower bitrate console, the lower spec'd system, it forced them to continue the idea that, well, maybe let's not put a lower poly model or a lower quality image of what is in the game exactly. Let's continue the representation route. Let's make beautiful artwork that represents what the game is all about. And, in this case, it's Duke Nukem. It was the first thing I saw. But it shows, this is a 2D piece of artwork that somebody, for the most part, hand drew. This text is a little dated, but for the most part, that this is more reminiscent of the Super Nintendo box art or the Genesis box art than anything that Nintendo or Sega were putting out for the most part. And PlayStation was guilty of the low poly models on a case too. But it's a juxtaposition between this and this. And after the 5th generation, the 6th generation really could have only gone up from there. So what better way to start it off with some of the stinkers? And you know what? This is not even fair, because this game, box art, Mario Kart Super Circuit for the Game Boy Advance, this is not bad. This is it's a lower quality model, you could tell. But this is I say this is not great artwork. It's not bad artwork either. This is, we're on the right track. The models, the 3D models, are getting better. And, this is a Game Boy Advance game. This is still just a representation of what the game is. None of this happens, other than this guy and the cart, in Mario Kart Super Circuit. And it doesn't look a damn thing like this. It's looking more like this. So this is just a representation. This is not even like trying to show you what's going on in the game. And this is kind of the shift. We saw this in the last generation too, and there were games that were simple, iconic, bold pieces of artwork. But this is really where we started to shift completely away from let's show exactly what's on screen to let's show something that represents the entire game. And again, we saw this in previous generations, the Zelda series being a very good example of it. Every box art up until this point has been just symbolic and simple and beautiful, simply for the sake of being beautiful. But this is where it started to become more widespread. We did see this in the previous generation, in the 5th generation, but really in the 6th, this is where it took another leap forward. And artists started to create representations of what the whole thing is about, rather than what you'd be seeing in the game. And as we move forward, Sega was kind of going backwards. We were getting these, again, beautiful artwork. Crazy Taxi is a fantastic game, nothing against it. But, we're getting this really, really nice 2D hand-drawn artwork. We saw a lot on the Saturn that it was, 3D poly models. And, again, we saw hand-drawn artwork sometimes. But it's interesting that they kind of went back. And, again, we started getting representations. Same with Mario Kart. We started getting representations of what the game was all about, rather than a representation of what we're supposed to be seeing on screen. And again, here we go. We're moving even further with the GameCube. This is kind of a similar thing with the Japanese N64 Mario Party games, except the artwork is looking even better. We're getting higher quality models, higher quality text. It's just getting better. But this is also where, artistic experimentation started to flourish a little more. And we would get things like the Pikmin 2 box art, which in my opinion is just a beautiful, beautiful artwork. This text up here, it's a little dated, I will say. This is very, 2004. But this, it's not even hand-drawn. It's not even a model. It's not even, a low poly or high poly model. This is just a still frame of, real or hyper-realistic models of these characters. And it's gorgeous. This is some of the more gorgeous artwork that I think Nintendo's ever put out. Not because the drawing is fantastic, but it's so simple, but it's so highly detailed, and it's tangible because it's real. It's essentially a photograph, and it makes it really unique. It's beautiful in a way. And then on the other side of the spectrum, PlayStation started doing stuff like this. Now, as we continue past the 6th generation, and we move into the 7th, and things really start looking good again. We're past the teething stages completely of 3D artwork, and we start seeing some of the more iconic artwork of the modern era. The 7th generation is considered another Renaissance era for video games, and that's not more apparent than the gritty stuff that we started seeing on PS3 and Xbox 360. Except this gritty stuff is really, really well done. And this game is over 15 years old now, but it holds up really well. We're at the point now where the artwork, even though it's 3D, generated imagery, it's done in the computer. It's still done by artists, and now we have the technology to where this still looks gorgeous. And, we saw this on PS3, we saw it on Xbox 360, even on PC. A lot of PC games, I didn't really show a lot of PC games, but a lot of PC games before this, they were very similar, or they would just not have any artwork at all. It would just be like, oh, it's a video, Left 4 Dead, and it would just be like blank, or be like Microsoft Windows, something, blah, blah, blah. But now on PC, and this was about the end of the DVD-ROM era for PC games, but it was definitely a peak, and we got physical box art that was absolutely gorgeous. Again, this is hyper-realistic. It looks like an image. And again, this is clearly not an image, but it's photorealistic to where it's almost tangible. And, then on the other side of the spectrum, the cartoonish 3D imagery was truly reaching next levels of beautiful. Obviously, Nintendo with the Wii was a very kid-friendly system. We had moved past the GameCube where they're trying to compete with Microsoft and Sony. So let's stick to our guns. Let's do what we know is going to work. And they created some of the most beautiful box art in the entire generation. And the models and everything were just starting to really reach new heights. And heights that at this point we're not really topping anymore. This box art could be for a Switch game, and it would sit perfectly right next to Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild, whatever. This artwork, we're at the point where it's starting to blend in with each other, but this is where it was perfected. This is where the modern 3D box art was really perfected, here in the 7th generation. For the 8th generation, things just kind of continued how they were, except things got even better. On Xbox and PlayStation, we were getting even higher quality, realistic renders, and it was starting to reach hyper, photorealistic levels. And it was honestly some of the most impressive stuff out there. And then again, on the other side of the spectrum, we had Nintendo with its more cutesy, artsy styling, cartoonish stuff. And this obviously is a particularly beautiful example. This was again where the artists were kind of reaching the point again where we're in another renaissance. Now this is past the 7th generation renaissance era of gaming, but here in the 8th generation, there's still some great stuff coming out, and the artwork is just getting better and better. Again, there's weak points, but this is some of the highest quality. This is the highest quality stuff, period, that we've seen as far as 3D artwork, and this is now rivaling the Super Nintendo and Genesis era hand-drawn 2D artwork. It is now, we've completely abandoned the idea of let's represent what's on screen because we can perfectly, show that. We don't need to do that. Let's represent what the game is all about. Let's show you what it's going to look like. Like, okay, this is exactly what Link looks like in Wind Waker. But let's give you, a more artistic take on the, real purpose of the game. What is it all about? What's the meaning? And it allowed art to really, really flourish. And between these, we were still getting stuff like Pikmin 3. Pikmin was still doing it. Here we go. Photorealistic artwork. This is essentially a picture. It's not a picture. This is 3D generated. But it's photorealistic, and it's simple. We were starting to now get, again, aside from Zelda, and Zelda was, we were no longer with just the simple, Legend of Zelda, whatever the game is, on a, gold or black or whatever. But, we were starting to just get simple, more iconic representations of this series. Not just Pikmin, but this is where we were starting to get more simple artwork that speaks to a lot of people. That is iconic, that sticks out. We didn't have to always do, a perfect representation, gorgeous, highly detailed art. Let's show something that stands out, something that's different on the shelf compared to the competition. Now, the 9th generation is not really something I can comment on. I think we're basically continuing what the 7th generation started, what the 8th generation continued. I don't own a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series X, so I honestly don't have any physical games from either of the consoles. The only thing that I have that's even remotely in that era is the Nintendo Switch. And yeah, this is technically, is it an 8th generation or a 9th generation? I don't know. But since it came out in 2017 and it's still getting games to this day, the box art is still current, so I believe it at least partially represents what's going on in the industry. We're getting more of the same. We've kind of reached a stagnant point with artwork as far as styling, to where we're pretty much always getting it 3D generated. There's the era of hand-drawn artwork for video games, or really any media, is unfortunately completely lost. And like, yeah, it can be hand drawn on an iPad or, you know, on a drawing tablet. Okay. But, you know, it's not the same as what we had with the Super Nintendo. And that's okay. That's fine. Because some of this artwork is equally gorgeous. You know, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, these are some of the most gorgeous artwork that we've seen in video games. And it is really cool that with the Switch, we are getting box art that has a lot of variety. And, you know, we're going from the really realistic, you know, artistic representations to, again, Pikmin continuing the more photorealistic. Now, this is less photoreal. This is not like an actual picture like Pikmin 2, or, you know, trying to represent a picture like Pikmin 3. But again, we're getting photorealistic, you know, really, really highly detailed renders. It's supposed to represent a, you know, a real life scene. And then, you know, on the other end of the spectrum, we're still getting manufacturers putting out this high quality, gorgeous, pop, you know, cartoonish artwork for games that better suit it. Sonic Mania obviously is a return to form for the Sonic series. So yeah, we're going with a more retro styling. And we saw this starting in the 7th generation even, but really became more prominent in the 8th and now the 9th. The retro revival where we now not only want stuff to move forward, but we need it to reminisce the past because, well, the nostalgia sells, you know? So we're getting something like Sonic Mania instead of, you know, brand new representations of these characters, because everybody knows these characters in this form, and this is a more relatable version of Sonic than whatever, you know, Sega could realistically come up with now. I wouldn't say it's creative, because it's simply taking this and adapting it for a modern audience. And then on the other side of the spectrum, Nintendo continues to push the envelope of what it means to be a Zelda game. The art style continues to change, and we are getting artwork now that represents the art style of the game. Then again, this kind of started with the 7th generation, but it's become more and more prominent, and this right here is a perfect representation. We have the cartoonish game, you know, the nostalgic game that anybody could get into. We have the game that's, you know, realistic. It's grounded, and not a grounded reference to the game Grounded, but they are kind of similar in that way. And then we have the real, like, artsy, you know, realistic, not realistic, but artistic, stylized game. And things have changed so much. It's awesome that we have this kind of variety, and box art has changed with it. Box art has always adapted to the change in the video game industry, and whether it ages well or not, we're now at the point where it pretty much does. I solely think that the 4th generation and the 5th generation were the two biggest changes in box art. And the 5th generation was the teething period for 3D artwork, and as a result, it did suffer in that way. But it, you know, paved the way for some of the most iconic box art of all time. So can we really complain that much that the Banjo-Kazooie box doesn't look that great? I think not. I think, you know, progress is an interesting thing to follow, and sacrifices unfortunately have to be made in the name of progress, whether that be something serious or something as stupid and simple as video game artwork. And with that, that's pretty much the end of my little ramble. I'd like to thank everybody so much for watching. If you are, you know, keeping up with these in order, I will see you tomorrow. If not, well, I don't know when the next video will be, but I'll see you guys then.